Sorry if I mispronounced some people's names in this video, I kinda forgot how to read words, so... Akira Kurosawa is one of the greatest and most influential filmmakers to ever live.
A friend of mine, John Milius, actually was a huge fan of Kurosawa's. And so whenever the film was showing, he'd say, "Oh, you gotta come and see this, you gotta come and see this." And after the first one, the first one I saw was Seven Samurai, and after that I was completely hooked. I said, this is really good.
Let me say it simply. Kurosawa was my master and so many others. The master of so many other filmmakers over the years.
Kurosawa made most of his movies during the Japanese Golden Age, a very notable film movement that began after World War II and lasted until the early 1960s. The Japanese Golden Age not only featured the works of Akira Kurosawa, but also Yasujiro Ozu and Kenji Mizoguchi, two other very notable faces in international cinema. Akira Kurosawa is often recognized by his interest in samurai, American westerns, the composing of movement, and these neat little editing transitions.
鬼にして掴んだ一文字家棟梁の道をただまっしぐらにお進みなさるほかはござらぬ。
However, I think the most important connecting tissue between all of Kurosawa's films is something once said by the director himself. I suppose all of my films have a common theme. If I think about it though, the only theme I can think of is really a question: why can't people be happier together? Alright, now let's talk about the films themselves, or at least the ones I've seen. Yes, I have not seen every Kurosawa movie. I'm sorry. My retrospectives are for filmmakers that, although I haven't seen every movie they've made, I still want to make a video on them. If you want to hear me talk about every film a filmmaker has made, that's what my ranking videos are for. I am sorry though. Out of the Kurosawa films that I've seen, Drunken Angel is my least favorite. That doesn't mean it's bad, it's still really solid. This wasn't Kurosawa's first movie, his first was Sanshiro Segata in 1943, which he made a sequel to in 1945. Damn, he really was ahead of his time. But anyways, Drunken Angel. This film marks the first collaboration between Akira Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune, who gives an amazing performance in this movie. Takashi Shimura also gives an intense and explosive performance in this film. The music is really sweet, especially with those melancholic acoustic melodies. It's also interesting to see Kurosawa in such an early stage in his career as a filmmaker. You get to see the building blocks for what would become his trademark style, like the impressionistic editing and the painterly cinematography. However, this movie falls flat for me in the story department. The story isn't bad, but it feels messy and even disorienting at times. Maybe that was intentional. I guess the film does make you feel like you're on your fourth beer shouting about the bugs in your skin in a parking lot, but it didn't feel that intentional to me. I will say I do like the way the story touches on the effects of toxic masculinity. Also, the film kinda reminded me of Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master, and I wonder if he was at all inspired by some of the ideas present in Drunken Angel. That being said, I much prefer The Master to this film. Overall, even though I have some issues with it, I think it's a fun movie to watch unravel, and I'd recommend checking it out if you're curious. Stray Dog is Kurosawa's take on a noir film. It's a relatively simple story, but it's a fun ride nonetheless. It's about a detective getting his gun stolen and trying to find the person who stole it, hence the name Stray Dog. We've got ourselves a comedian over here. The acting performances from Toshiro Mifune and Takashi Shimura are fantastic as always. The cinematography is gorgeous, intricate, and layered. As always. This movie is very suspenseful at times and has some really well executed chase scenes. It also has a gripping mystery. The humid summer day atmosphere of this film is so enticing. Although I don't have any major issues, this wasn't really a movie that wowed me. That being said, it's still an amazing and underappreciated early noir film that I'd recommend watching. Although Akira Kurosawa started making movies in the 1940s, he truly started taking off as a filmmaker in the 1950s. He started the 1950s off with Rashomon. This film is an adaptation of the short story called In a Grove by Rinosuke Akutagawa. The performances are expressive and wild. The cinematography in this film is beautiful, textured, and masterfully composed. The film is visually striking, which can be attributed to the legendary cinematographer Kazuo Miyagawa.
黒沢のパンをかさ防衛なんだからそうすると結局 絞りを相当かけなきゃいけないわけね。で絞りをかけることによってライティングのこう情緒みたいなちょっと壊れかけるわけで、その時に宮川さんが来たわけだよね。
Although Miyagawa most often worked with Kenji Mizoguchi, he also worked with Yasujiro Ozu on Floating Weeds and with Kurosawa on Yojimbo and, well, Rashomon. Kazuo Miyagawa is one of the most recognizable figures of the Japanese Golden Age, so it would be a shame if I didn't at least mention his work. Anyways, the score is incredible and the comedic moments are really funny, especially that one fight scene near the end. But of course, you can't talk about this movie without talking about the story structure. This movie follows one moment told through 4 different points of view, which is a structure that is literally called the Rashomon structure. So yeah, not only is this film very influential, but it also uses that structure to its advantage. This movie explores selfishness and deception through the way each point of view differentiates from the other. In the same way that a lie is a twist on reality, this film avoids giving the audience an objective truth. The movie as a whole is also very artsy, and I love that. Lastly, that ending was just fantastic. Overall, this movie is a masterpiece. Akira is my favorite Kurosawa film. I was blown away when I watched this film, and I'd now consider it one of my favorite movies of all time. Although there are very few films that have managed to make me cry, this is among one of those movies. It's a film that finds hope in the unexplainable and isolating topic that is death. A film that shows the importance of living life to the fullest rather than wasting away as time ticks by. A film that reminds us why kindness will forever be more impactful than hatred. Life has no real meaning, so we must find that meaning within ourselves. Takashi Shimura is heartbreaking as Kenji Watanabe, and I empathized so much with his character. The cinematography is beautifully composed as usual for Kurosawa. The editing is really solid, and I especially love that playful montage near the beginning of the film. The sound design is immersive and has some brilliant uses of silence. But of course, there's the writing. This movie manages to be both existentially heartbreaking and reassuringly heartwarming at the same time. The characterization is brilliant with many memorable characters that all feel so real. The story structure is unique because the third act is very different from the rest of the film. Also, that ending... Thanks for making me tear up, Kurosawa. Overall, this movie is a masterpiece. Highly recommend watching this if you haven't already. Seven Samurai is a 3-hour action epic that 100% deserves its status as one of the best movies ever made. All the characters are memorable and I love the dialogue. Toshiro Mifune is funny, emotional, and just insane as Kikuchiyo. The hero's journey that Kikuchiyo goes on to prove himself as a noble samurai is mesmerizing to watch unfold. Takashi Shimura is fantastic as Kanbi Shimada. The cinematography is gorgeous, intricate, and has so much depth. The music fits the movie really well. The atmosphere of this film is also so immersive, you can honestly feel the wind, the rain, and the gravel in certain scenes. This movie manages to be funny, hopeful, and tragic all at the same time. The action scenes are stunning and have some impressive stunt work. The final battle scene in the rain in particular is the stuff of legend. The writing and the story are engaging from beginning to end. This movie touches on many themes like class issues, the importance of teamwork, legacy, the horrors of war, and the abuse of power. Each theme is explored in a brilliant and nuanced way. Also, that ending is just beautiful. This film truly has everything you could possibly want out of an action samurai epic. Yeah, this movie's a masterpiece. Throne of Blood is Kurosawa's adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth told in the feudal Japan setting. In my Coen Brothers ranking video, I stated that Shakespearean dialect is pretty difficult for me to engage with. However, the stories that Shakespeare has written are marvelous. Toshiro Mifune's performance in this movie is one of my favorites from him. Mifune's portrayal of Washizu's rise to power and descent into madness is captivating to watch unfold. This is one of the most beautiful Kurosawa movies in terms of cinematography. Since I talked about Kazuo Miyagawa, I should probably also mention Kurosawa's primary cinematographer, Asukazu Nakai. Although Nakai isn't as well known as Miyagawa, I think he deserves just as much credit for his painting-like visuals. So many atmospheric, detailed, intricate, textured, and memorable shots in this movie. Also, the story is a gripping tale about how arrogance and the desire for power can lead to madness. Although the movie changes the setting, the dialogue, and adds a larger scope to Shakespeare's original vision, it's very very clear that Kurosawa has tons of respect for Shakespeare's work. It's one of my favorite cinematic retellings of one of Shakespeare's plays, and this doesn't mark the last time Kurosawa would adapt the bard's work. I can't wait to talk about that one later. Anyways, I highly recommend watching this masterpiece if you haven't already. The Hidden Fortress is the film that inspired Star Wars. Yeah, if you didn't think I was a nerd before, just wait until you hear this shit. It's interesting to compare and contrast this to Star Wars and see where George Lucas got his inspirations from. You get to see the samurai versions of Obi-Wan, C-3PO, R2-D2, Princess Leia, and the lightsaber duels. However, there's enough differences between the two movies to make each of them stand on their own. And it's not like this movie is only noteworthy for inspiring Star Wars, because you can easily ignore that and just watch the film on its own merits. Toshiro Mifune is awesome as Rokuro, Misa Ohara is badass as Princess Yuki, the peasant characters provide some really funny comic relief, the cinematography is gorgeous, textured, and atmospheric. There's something about the cinematography in Kurosawa's work that just makes you appreciate nature more than you already do. The action scenes are immaculate and have some fantastic choreography. I really only have one problem with the movie, and it's a bit of a nitpick. During one of the action scenes, there are guns being fired at the main characters, and it's pretty easy to tell that there was a jump cut when they ducked to avoid the gunfire. Obviously, this was done so that the actors didn't have to be in danger, and I'm glad Kurosawa was taking safety precautions. I just wish it looked a little less wonky from an audience point of view. That being said, one little nitpick doesn't ruin the entire movie. This is an incredible samurai film that I'd highly recommend watching if you haven't already. Although Yojimbo isn't one of my favorite Kurosawa films like it is for many other people, it's still a fantastic movie. It's pretty common knowledge at this point that Yojimbo was remade by Sergio Leone into A Fistful of Dollars. Although I haven't seen the movie yet, I do know that Kurosawa did not like the movie very much. He made a fine movie, but it was my movie. Oops. Toshiro Mifune is badass as Sanjuro, who is such a cool and slick character. The villains are menacing and the side characters are memorable. The cinematography is so beautiful and layered. As usual for Kurosawa, this movie really uses the environment to its advantage. There's one shot in particular where the villain's face turns to a maniacal smile as the house behind him goes up in flames. It's a shot that's textured, emotionally effective, and you can almost feel your face get warmer as the fire builds up. The writing is brilliant as well. Fantastic world building, funny comedy, and incredible use of visual storytelling. It even has a great message about the pointlessness and selfishness of violence. Also, the action is engaging and pretty brutal for a film from 1961. The only thing that keeps this from being 5 stars for me is the story is pretty damn simple. To be fair, Kurosawa uses that to his advantage to make something so uniquely, well, Kurosawa. However, it's still that lack of complexity that prevents this from being an all-time favorite of mine. But overall, I love this movie and I'd highly recommend watching it if you haven't already. Sanjuro is the sequel to Yojimbo, and although it isn't as good, it's still a solid as hell follow-up. Toshiro Mifune delivers another fantastic performance as the anti-hero Sanjuro. The cinematography is intricate and beautiful as always. The production design is great as well. I mean, the movie mostly takes place in one room, so the production design better be fucking good. I like the music and the comedy quite a bit. The action raises the brutality of Yojimbo to an awesome effect. Also, this movie has probably one of the most badass movie endings I've seen in a while. However, I had some issues with the writing. Not only is the story kinda simple, but I wish the side characters were a little more interesting. That being said, I do like the way the story explores trust and loyalty through the characters that surround Sanjuro. Although the story may be a bit basic, Kurosawa still directs this movie masterfully. Overall, although not one of my favorites, it's still an amazing movie that I'd recommend watching. High and Low is a movie filled with surprises. All the performances are top-notch. Toshiro Mifune in particular gives an outstanding performance as Gondo. The characterization is also fantastic, and I love how distinct and morally gray each character is. The long takes are intricate, and I also love that splash of pink when the factory starts smoking up. Unnecessary? Maybe, but it looks awesome, so I don't care. However, when talking about the cinematography, it would be a crime to not mention the blocking. The characters are placed in a way that reveals the emotions, the motivations, and the conflict of the story being told. The writing is fantastic and had me on the edge of my seat. It's a screenplay that locks horns with class issues and human morality in such a gripping way. The film is split up into two distinct acts. The first act with Gondo negotiating with the kidnapper, and the second act with the detectives trying to catch the kidnapper. The first act is just so damn good, and I love how it mostly takes place in one location. The second act, although not as good as the first, is still really captivating as it trudges you through the dirtiest parts of Yokohama. Also, that ending was chilling to say the least. Yeah, this movie's a masterpiece. Redbeard is Kurosawa's bleakest and most brutal movie. Yuzo Kayama gives a harrowing performance as the lovable main character. Toshiro Mifune gives a much more humble and laid-back performance compared to his previous work as Dr. Need. Mifune being able to tackle a wide variety of roles and perform each of them masterfully further proves why he's one of the greatest actors of all time. The cinematography looks gorgeous as always. This film uses shadows in a beautifully haunting way that's very unique compared to other Kurosawa films. One shot I want to highlight is one near the middle of the film when Sahachi realizes that his wife left him to be with someone else. Sahachi is weeping in the foreground covered in dark shadows while his wife is staring at him in the background with the sunlight beaming on her. It's a powerful, memorable, and poetic image that I think deserves far more attention. Although I'd say that scene is my favorite from the movie, there's so many great ones to choose from. The uncomfortable scene with Yasumoto and a patient named Mantis, the horrific surgery scene, the tragic yet peaceful last 10 minutes. I will admit the 3-hour runtime is a little intimidating at first, especially considering this isn't an action epic like Seven Samurai. However, I never found this movie boring, even though it hardly has a central plot. The movie is made up of many different vignettes, each of which is really interesting and very heartbreaking. It's through these vignettes that this movie is able to touch on different themes like romance, abuse, poverty, mental illness, and death. To be honest, there's only one scene I have some issues with. There's a fight scene in this movie, and it felt really out of place. I mean, it's a Kurosawa fight scene, so of course it was directed well. However, an introspective drama did not need a scene where a doctor fights some people. That being said, one weird scene doesn't completely destroy this incredible movie. I highly recommend watching this if you haven't already. Dersu Uzala is Kurosawa's only film in Russian, and it's incredible. It's very easy to tell that this was a film that Akira Kurosawa was very passionate about making. Kurosawa wanted to adapt the true story of Dersu Uzala into a movie since the 1950s, but Kurosawa wasn't able to because of how different Japan is from Russia. It's really cool to see a Kurosawa film about nature and our relationship with nature. Although the visuals aren't nearly as good as Kurosawa's other films, there are still some really pretty shots, and the way this movie uses natural lighting is truly remarkable. I love the character of Dersu Uzala. He's such a fascinating, charming, and silly little guy. I also really love the unlikely friendship that forms between Dersu and Vladimir. The movie is basically about these characters on a journey through the wilderness, which sounds boring. However, the film gives you an experience that is whimsical, heartwarming, transcendental, and deeply personal. This movie might also contain my favorite score from any Kurosawa film. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but I just really like the peaceful flutes and strings that wash over this film. Also, that ending was so powerful. Side note, this isn't a problem with the film itself, but this film really needs a restoration. There are some shots in this movie that look a little rusty. That aside, this movie is very sweet and I'd highly recommend watching it. Kagemusha is wow.
When 20th Century Fox came into the production, he had already prepared it. He was all ready to go. And Toho was short $1.5 million or something like that. They weren't going to go unless they could come up with this money. They couldn't sell the foreign rights because nobody bought Japanese films. And so it was really a way of just saying, look, let's get this film made. Give Toho the money they need to finish it. And 20th Century Fox obviously did it. They didn't expect to make any money out of it. They did it as a favor to me.
Tatsuya Nakaida gives a fantastic performance as the main character, and watching him deal with living in someone else's shadow is mesmerizing to watch unfold. The cinematography is so vibrant, beautiful, and colorful. The dream sequence in particular had some awe-inspiring use of colors. This is a 3-hour movie, and unlike most of Kurosawa's films, this one is pretty slow-paced. However, the slow pace really allows the film's rich atmosphere to take over, and the 3-hour runtime really flies by. I know there are some people who think this movie is boring, but those people have their eyes on backwards. If I had to compare this to another movie, I'd say this is kinda like the Kurosawa version of Barry Lyndon. Although I do think Barry Lyndon is the stronger movie, I still love Kagemusha. My only problem with this movie is I think the action scenes are a bit underwhelming. I can't believe I'm saying that about an Akira Kurosawa film, but I just feel like the action scenes lacked a punch to them. To be fair, this isn't an action movie. This movie is more of a period piece drama and character study like Barry Lyndon, and that stuff is done really well. Although not one of my favorite Kurosawa films, this is still a fantastic movie that I'd highly recommend watching. As much as I love Throne of Blood, it isn't my favorite Kurosawa film based on a Shakespeare play. My favorite would have to be Ran. It's a retelling of Shakespeare's King Lear set in 16th century Japan. The characters are all distinctive and memorable. Lord Hidetora goes through some mesmerizing character development. Lady Kaede is an empathetic character at first, but becomes pretty despicable as the film goes on. Saburo is a character with so much depth, and even the comic relief character, Kiyoami, is a character with so many layers. The cinematography is just on another level. Incredible staging, gorgeous use of landscape, jaw-dropping scope, and stunning use of color. The sets design and the costumes not only fit the time period, but they also make the characters pop out against the background. Every shot in this movie just looks like an oil painting come to life. I also love the blood effects in this movie. It doesn't look realistic, but the film uses that bright red blood to make the film all the more expressionistic and painter-like. The music in this movie is fantastic. I especially love that one action scene where all the sound effects and dialogue are muted, so all that's there is the intense visuals and the haunting music. That sequence just took my breath away. Kurosawa clearly enjoys making movies that showcase the horrors of violence, greed, and power. In that sense, this movie kinda feels like Kurosawa looking back on his career as a filmmaker. Yeah, this film is a masterpiece, and I'd highly recommend watching it if you haven't already. Lastly, there's Dreams, which is an absolutely beautiful movie. Surrealism is one of my favorite artistic genres, so seeing Kurosawa's take on that was just marvelous. This is also an anthology movie where each segment shows a different dream from Kurosawa. It's a really interesting and personal concept for a movie. Each segment has gorgeous, colorful, and vibrant cinematography. This is probably one of Kurosawa's most beautiful movies in terms of visuals. The acting performances are really solid throughout. Also, the music is so expressive. Okay, now I'm going to try and talk about each segment without giving too much away because I don't like spoiling stuff for others. The Sunshine Through the Rain and the Peach Orchard segments are both very touching retrospectives on childhood. The Blizzard is my least favorite segment from the movie. It's not bad, but it's not nearly as interesting as the others. The Tunnel is my second favorite segment. It's a haunting, heartbreaking, and vulnerable look at grief and past mistakes. Crows is my favorite segment. Van Gogh is one of my favorite painters of all time. Yeah, it's a generic take, but he's considered one of the greats for a reason. His paintings are beautiful. I adore this segment because not only is it a love letter to Van Gogh's art, but it's a love letter to art in general. I also just loved seeing Martin Scorsese's performance as Van Gogh. The Mount Fuji in Red and the Weeping Demon segments are terrifying and disturbing looks at war and destruction. The Village of the Watermills segment closes the movie on a very peaceful note. The setting of this segment is so beautiful that I'd honestly love to live in it. The segment also has a beautiful and optimistic portrayal of death that ends the movie on a nice, bittersweet note. Overall, this is an incredible movie and I'd highly recommend watching it. Alright, now I'll briefly discuss my ratings and ranking of each film that I saw. I'd rate this movie a 7 out of 10. I'd rate these 2 movies an 8 out of 10. I'd rate these 6 movies a 9 out of 10. And I'd rate these 6 movies a 10 out of 10. And here's my ranking of the films. I'll keep it on screen for a couple seconds, but you can also just pause the video if you're really curious. And I think I'm gonna end things there. If any of the movies I talked about sounded interesting to you, check them out. Subscribe or something like that. Bye bye.